Alright, so this video is kind of a continuation on one that I did this past fall. You can see this is a Husqvarna 359 chainsaw. It's actually pretty nice, and I did some troubleshooting on it, and then I had a hard drive crash and I lost the videos, but managed to recover some of it, and here's some of the highlights of it. You can see some of the scoring that's on the piston as I rotate it there, and the same thing on the cylinder. And I verified it, with checking the compression and everything. And if I remember right, I was only getting like 20 or 25 psi or something like that, next to nothing. So it sat there for a long time, and then I decided, well, I'm going to go ahead and fix it up, because it's actually a really nice chainsaw. And I decided I'm going to go ahead and replace the cylinder and the piston, and I went in and did it, and you can see where I'm just disassembling everything, taking the handle off, which is pretty easy. There are just some main components you got to take off for clearance, and that's including the carburetor. And once I got the linkage, your choke linkage and all that stuff off, and I just kind of let it hang there to the side, because it's out of the way. And you can see where I'm loosening up the cylinder, and you can see the clearance holes on top of the cylinder, so you can reach in with your Torx wrench and take everything off, and then just slowly lift up the cylinder, and it should just slide right out. So there's the piston, here's the cylinder. We need to take all this stuff off of there. You can kind of look inside. There's some discoloration, and there's the scoring that we saw on the earlier video. So we just need to take all this stuff off and place it on the new cylinder. Here's there's the piston. It's pretty scored, and the piston ring is just stuck in there. It's just so we'll be replacing that. Well, let's get to work on the cylinder here. So there's the white box that has the cylinder and the piston kit and everything you need. The rod, the retainer rings, and gasket. And this is an aftermarket, so I don't know the quality of it. I mean, it was affordable, put it that way. So, and it came with everything you need. My connecting rod was good, so I didn't have to worry about that. There wasn't any jiggling or anything going on. But the kit came complete, and I just compared them side by side and made sure that everything was good to go. So just started disassembling everything off of the old cylinder. And for most of it, I would just take it off, take off the components, and just put them directly onto the new one. But everything transferred over pretty nicely. So I just did this piece by piece. And when it was done, I just inspected it again to make sure everything was where it should be. And then I was ready to take a look at the piston. So you have to take one of the retainer rings off of one side, and then you're able to push that rod through and take it out, and then your piston will slide off of the connecting rod. And you can see the massive scoring there, and that ring was just fused on there. So there must have been a whole hell of a lot of heat going on. So I just got everything, prepping everything out of the box. The piston ring, that little rod, and your retainer rings. So the first thing I did was with the piston ring, and I oiled everything up just to ease assembly. Because for the most part, you got to just take your time and, slide that ring on. You don't want to go, too tough with it, because that piston ring, they will snap if you're not careful, so just get it into place and spread it out just enough to get over the piston. I mean, there's some other tools, a sleeve or a shim or something that you can use, but I've always had pretty good luck just doing it by hand. Just make sure it's all oiled, and just take your time. And then you can see the little notch there up on the piston. Just make sure that lines up, and you can see when the ring, there you go, when the ring's compressed, you can see how it fits snug around that little notch. So just make sure that's ready. And you need to put one side, one of the retainer rings on one side there, and oil up the rod, and you're ready to insert it onto your connecting rod. Get it all in place. Then you can slide it in there. And make sure your piston is oriented correctly. There's usually a little arrow pointing towards the exhaust side. Make sure that is aligned, and once everything's on, then you put the other side, the other ring, in place. Make sure it snaps in there, and make sure it's in there snug. Jiggle it around, make sure it's not just going to pop out of there. So the cylinder is ready to get put on, and before I put the gasket on, I kind of like to put gasket, that Forma gasket or whatever, Permatex stuff, and I put a really light layer on the bottom there, on the bottom surface, and then put the gasket on, and it helps seal it. Plus it helps hold the gasket in place while you're putting everything on. I'm oiling up the piston, and I do that on the piston and on the cylinder just to ease assembly. Make sure it'll just slide right in, and all this oil will burn up once you crank it up. So I just put a light coating on everything, and then put the gasket stuff onto the cylinder also, just a real thin layer. I just want to make sure there's not going to be any leaks at all. And I usually wait for it to get tacky before I assemble everything, but if you're doing this and taking your time, I mean, there's time going by here, because you really want to take your time, get everything lined up, and then slowly get the cylinder to slip down in there over the piston. And just be patient with it, and it'll go right in. You can see it starting to slide down. I'm making sure everything's lining up correctly. And I just got a flashlight out just to double check, make sure everything's where it should be. Make sure it's sealing everywhere. And after that, you can just go ahead and put your fasteners, your screws back into place, and you can also just drop them down that clearance hole and start out, just getting them snug on there. But when you start, applying some torque, go in a crisscross pattern and follow those, where you just get them snug and then you tighten them down, go 80% then 100%, and everything was in place. Everything seemed pretty solid there. So I just started putting everything back together and getting the carburetor on. Make sure your linkage and make sure that's pretty snug on there too, going into that adapter. And make sure your choke's connected right. You can see the compression's already there. There I took the compression off, the compression release, so that I can pull it. Everything seemed to be doing pretty good. So I just took that apart and started putting everything back together. So you can see I just put everything back together, and in between the times when I actually made those previous video clips and the time it took me to recover it from that crashed hard drive, I had put everything together and actually used it a couple of times. And you can see it looks like it's in great shape here, and you can see over here where this is where I actually used it. We had a tree that was dying, and you can see the size of these stumps. But that's the chainsaw I used to cut all that up. So it's a really nice chainsaw. I mean, I was cutting that stuff up, it was just like butter. So to me, that was well worth the fix. The cylinder and piston kit that I got for that was an aftermarket, and it was actually fairly cheap. It was, $60 or so, and some labor involved. Not bad, but if I would have got the direct OEM replacement, it would have been $150 to $200 for the kit, plus the labor, and it probably wouldn't have been worth it for that customer if you're doing it for a customer. But I planned on using this myself, so I got the aftermarket, the cheaper aftermarket version. I don't know how long it's going to last, but for now the thing is working great. So, well, that's it. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and watch for my next video.